Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. I love trying to figure out ways that I can extend the use of my supplies. Today's cards feature a beautiful set that was released by Simon Says Stamp during STAMPtember, Raindrops. When I saw this set, I was reminded of some beautiful teardrop Christmas ornaments that I have. And so now we have raindrops that have been transformed. The first thing that I did was to sort all of the raindrops that I was going to use and their accompanying pattern stamps. On to the ink blended backgrounds. I worked with Distress Oxide inks on Bristol Smooth cardstock. The ink was applied in arches, starting with the lightest ink and working towards the darkest. For this first background, I'm working with a combination of squeezed lemonade, fossilized amber, walnut stain, and black soot. When creating an ink blended background, after the initial laying out of the colors, they are reapplied several times, extending one into the other. The overlap of the colors is what creates a nice smooth transition from one color to the next. I continue to reapply the inks until I have a nice smooth blend between them. Some inks blend more quickly than others, so it really depends on the colors that you have chosen. To really accentuate that glowing effect, black soot is introduced at the top of the panel and the two sides. It is applied over the darkest ink, for this card, walnut stain. I work back and forth applying the walnut stain, then the black, and then back to the walnut stain until I'm satisfied that I have a nice dark tone, and then I blend it out into the fossilized amber. To create those nice smooth transitions between colors, different amounts of pressures are used depending on where you're working. When I'm working on blending two of the colors, I will apply a much lighter touch. All three panels were inked in the exact same way. For this panel, starting from lightest to darkest, I worked with tumbled glass, broken china, faded jeans, and black soot. For the final background, I used festive berries, candied apple, and aged mahogany. Again, black soot was used on the outside edges to really deepen up the mahogany. Using the solid raindrops, I stamped out the pattern of the ornaments using Hero Art's White Unicorn ink. This was a good method for me to map out the design before I committed to the embossing. When working on those lighter colors, like the squeezed lemonade and the tumbled glass, I stamped each raindrop 2 times so that it was visible. My 5 sizes of raindrops were set up on acrylic blocks rather than using the MISTI. That would be way too time consuming for me. The white inked images were simply a guide. I wasn't overly concerned that I had the embossed images completely lined up with them. If a little bit of the white showed, it would just add to that glowing effect. I'm mixing it up and stamping different designs over top of the white raindrops with Versamark ink. Before I moved on to this step, I did make sure that that white ink was completely dry. For the red background, these pretty ornament raindrops are going to be embossed with gold embossing powder. To create hanging ornaments, I pinned on lines using a Versamarker. I made sure that I used the bullet nose nib to get a fine line. Like the ornaments, the strings were embossed in gold. For the yellow background, the ornaments were embossed with white embossing powder. For both this card and the blue one, there are a lot more ornaments, and I don't want those lines to stand out too much. The strings to hang all of those ornaments are drawn on using a white jelly roll pen. You may have noticed that I'm using a T-ruler. This is an essential tool to get perpendicular lines. For the blue card, I drew in the lines before I embossed the ornaments. There was no good reason for doing this, and I had to wait for the jelly roll pen to dry. So now on to the embossing, and I use silver embossing powder for this card. Sometimes I rediscover something in my craft room, and in this case it's my Sizzix Sidekick. I used this tiny die cutter in my last post when I had a whole bunch of die cutting to do. I'm die cutting a teeny tiny bow from Lawn Fawn Stitched Ornaments. There are lots of ornaments, and so this little die cutter saved me a whole bunch of time. These little bows were die cut from paper that matched the embossing for each card. I did have to trim the little string off the die cut. I'm using Simon's new glue stick to attach them. All of the panels were mounted on white sheet foam. This is a common practice for me. I like the added dimension and the sturdiness that it provides the card. The panels were then mounted on black cardstock that was just slightly bigger than the panel size to provide a narrow reveal, then onto a card base that measured 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. The sentiments for these cards were created with Simon's Hope, Peace, and Chunky Joy dies. They were die cut from paper again to match the embossing, and all of the sentiments were mounted on foam die cuts. The blue card was embellished with lots of silver mirror confetti. Gold confetti was used on the red card, and on the yellow card I used a beautiful iridescent white confetti. Another one of my common practices is to top confetti and sequins with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew. These embellishments help the Nouveau drops maintain their high dome shape. When the Morning Dew dries, it is clear, leaving a beautiful jewel-like appearance to the confetti. The perfect final touch to these Christmas cards. I hope you enjoyed this video featuring Simon Says Stamps Raindrops and using this stamp set in a way that might not be expected. It is always a good thing when we can get lots of mileage out of our crafting supplies. Thank you so much for dropping by, and as always, I appreciate your visit.